If we haven't met yet, I'm Rachel Bourne, and I help people and companies rethink the way they do work. Every year in December and January, all of the experts and analysts come out and they make bold predictions for the following year. It's one of my favorite times of the year, not gonna lie. Here we are in March, and I keep wondering how many of these forecasts are holding up? Which ones are already falling apart? This year, it was definitely all about AI will transform everything. Remote work is here to stay. There's some really interesting debates with that. And that there's general economic uncertainty related to the election and those things. I know you guys are feeling a lot of that, but it has been a bit more extreme than I think people expected. We're going to unpack that today on the Shift Show. I'm Rachel Bourne. Let's start with what was undeniable. The trends that virtually every analyst and forecaster, workforce planning expert, etc., all agreed on. AI is reshaping work. I know that's a surprise for some people, but it is a tool and not a replacement. So there's a question that's really forming. I think when AI started really emerging, people were worried, is AI going to take my job? The answer is no, but people using AI might. And it's really moving now within work where it's not just hype anymore. It's becoming much more deeply embedded in how companies are operating. Companies are embedding repetitive tasks. Now, if you don't work for a tech company, things like bots might be kind of new for you. They're using it now to distill insights out of data, enhancing decision-making, speeding up our workflows, and we're getting more done. But it's not just replacing entire jobs at the rate that many people feared. Instead, new AI roles are growing. AI and machine learning specialists, data scientists. The takeaway is if you're in a key role with repetitive tasks, that's what I want you to really think about. AI will change how you work. And it might just be digesting information and sending emails. If you have the job title coordinator, those sorts of things. I want you to really think about the work that you do, the tasks, which are the fundamental building blocks of work. What of your work could be automated? And let's think about how we need to upskill from those. Another area that's really emerging is the great detachment becoming more of a workplace crisis. So what the data is really starting to show is that employee engagement is starting to hit pretty low rates, particularly over the last, 10 to 15 years. Workers aren't quitting like they did during the Great Recession. They're staying put, but they're checking out, right? They're doing this for a number of reasons. I very fundamentally do not believe that humans want to spend their time being lazy or not contributing to a company in any way. I think people are burned out. There's a lot going on, both from a change standpoint and also just work life, right? The lack of career development. I think people show up differently if they feel invested in and cared about and can bring their whole person to work. Being able to be developed and having safe environments are both big contributors. There are a ton of reasons for burnout. I was actually on a webinar in the fall, and one of my panelists said that people can assimilate change. The average person can take in 3 things that need to be repeated 52 times. And it blew my mind. And it's something I just continue to repeat the tape when I think about how much change is coming to us and how much we are assimilating as it relates to burnout. Those things are all really challenging to kind of navigate through. Plus, you have feelings and emotions related to the elections, overall economic uncertainty. It just creates the right circumstance for burnout. There are a number of reasons people are being asked to do more with less at work. They aren't getting the kind of career development that they probably need. There's some really good statistics related to both of those. The economic conditions, uncertainty around that, not to mention if you're a working parent or you have aging parents that you're a caretaker for or other, circumstances, it's just creating the perfect storm. One of my takeaways, though, still continues to be your level of engagement is a personal responsibility. you spend a third of your life working. And I'm personally am not willing to settle for that. I don't think we can wait for employers to fix it. There is a very significant conversation going around employee wellness. I don't think it's about employers solving for wellness. I think it is about employers creating the right environments in their workspaces so that people can thrive. The third place everyone was, for the most part, really aligned with is that hybrid work is here to stay, but employers do want more control. Now, I will say there's some hot debate that's going on LinkedIn, particularly related to a recent McKinsey report that was released around remote work. The experts that have been studying remote work for their entire careers actually think it's a pretty stable working situation. But I do think that most executives have now accepted that hybrid is really going to be the norm for us as we go forward. There are some interesting power dynamics related to this. More companies are implementing tracking tools. They're tightening hybrid policies. There's a continued push to return to the office. I think for us, though, we really need to think about, if you work remotely, don't disappear. Make sure that you remain visible. You are highlighting the work that you are accomplishing. Speak up in meetings. Don't sit there with your camera off. Document your wins. Build strong internal relationships. Those are the things that still, regardless of where you sit, are going to help your employer feel good about what you're doing. The last point I'm really going to highlight that all of the experts agree about is that upskilling and reskilling, which is going to be a huge theme for us here on the Shift Show. It's non-negotiable. We've got to continue to do that, and it needs to be the number one workforce strategy for employers. A massive amount of the workforce is going to need reskilling and upskilling through 2030, and particularly to meet the demands with AI. It is also going to be a move and a shift in the skills that are going to be needed. So if you aren't actively already learning and investing in your own career, look at the right certifications that you need. Consider using AI tools, even if your employer isn't. I don't want you to put any, company data on these tools, but use them in your own life. I use mine for meal planning as an example. It just reduces my mental load for some of those things, and it can help you get at least familiar with some of the tools. The most valuable employees are the ones who adapt with this new playbook that we're talking about. So keep that in mind as we move forward. So let's talk about the areas of contradiction and where the experts disagreed based on the research. The first was employee engagement. Being at an all-time high or low? Not sure. And I think the answer for us is it depends, and it depends on what your work situation looks like. One report talked about engagement actually collapsing. Qualtrics, and they are a great data company. I trust their research process and methodology. Another claimed that white-collar workers in particular were pretty engaged. I think the answer is that it depends. Is the engagement high because you're a knowledge worker and you're in a well-paying job, or low because you're in frontline, hourly, or a gig worker? I think it may depend on your employment type. I also think this is going to vary widely by company and the kind of culture within each of the organizations. So I'm certain that employers are working on their own engagement data, but the takeaway is, if you feel disengaged, look around in your environment. Some industries are thriving. And there are some really interesting data studies around the zone of proximity. If you are working with A players, you are more engaged and you perform better. So think about how maybe even the people around you are also influencing. Another area that the analysts really disagreed about were talent shortages versus hiring slowdowns. And I think a lot of that was related to maybe the industry that they were closer to. So some sectors, tech, particularly as it related to AI, healthcare, skilled trades is another interesting one. We have severe labor shortages kind of broadly. Other areas in corporate finance have been seeing hiring slowdowns and layoffs. And I think that's also related to how the tooling is making the employees more productive. So I don't know that the job market is shrinking. I think it is shifting. Unemployment did go up slightly this month. We're going to see with the Q1 jobs report that comes out in April. I think that's going to be a really interesting one. But the takeaway is if your industry is slowing down, be proactive, right? Have some of these conversations and think about the kind of pivots you can make before you're forced into one. One of the most interesting outliers that kind of came out of the research was from Josh Berzin, who is the godfather of HR. And he made some very just bold statements, I thought, around the rise of the super worker and delivering on the promise of AI. It's a very interesting article that you guys really should check out and read yourselves on this. It's not about just AI replacing work, but it's about creating super workers who can do 3 times the amount of work with AI assistant using things like agents. And we'll do an episode on what agents are and how they are kind of showing up in the workplace at some point later this year. But a particular takeaway for me is if you know how to leverage AI, you will be more productive, you will be more valuable, and you will be more promotable. But you will also see your employers, and I will kind of drop down to this here. They will be redesigning work as well, probably down to the task level. So it's not just about the output and the work itself that you are doing, but it is going to be about even who is doing the work, a human or a bot. And then the big question is, how then do you use the humans in new and different ways with higher value work? A big thing for us to kind of think about. Check the article. I'll link it in the notes for this show, but I thought that one was particularly interesting. One other report that just for me was a real outlier this year, and I think everybody should read themselves, is this World Economic Forum Future of Jobs report. So if you haven't read this, I really think you should do it. It is such an outlier in terms of how data rich it is and how global it is. They surveyed 1,000 of the leading global employers, and these are the key findings for it. There are some particularly good pages I also do want to highlight for you, which include the technology trends that are driving business transformation. So understand really what these things are just from sort of a technology 101, right? Know the difference between what AI and automation is, or what an agent is, or Gen AI. I hear and see these things really thrown around a lot, and folks don't always know the right terms to use. So the other thing I really just wanted to highlight, which is good news for us, is that the global employment change by 2030, and they're still expecting a net employment increase of 7% overall, even related to jobs that are being displaced by technology or different structural changes. It does highlight the areas that are the fastest growing jobs. So if you are early in your career, really thinking about reskilling and upskilling, some very strong potential here, and the fastest declining jobs. So these are a lot of the roles that are going to get replaced by automation, robots, agents. So if you are working in these sectors, another space that you really should think about, how do I reskill and upskill, and what are the things that for me I like to do in my job, and what are areas that I want to explore in new ways. It talks about disruption by country, which is another one if you are watching this around the world. And I really like this one in particular, which were the core skills of 2025. So another space, we are going to talk a lot about reskilling and upskilling and how do we increase our strengths in some of these. One of the things I can link to the other podcast on this is, how do I structure this also in a different way that I can think about how to tackle these, or in groups of skills that, I can tackle these in a more strategic way. The third area that I'd like to click on for an outlier, and what I just thought was another really interesting nugget, was areas of the employee life cycle that companies are neglecting. And if you are moving or changing, you should think about in new ways. companies, according to the data, are failing and not really thinking about their onboarding or their offboarding processes in the way that they need to. Those are moments that really matter for an employee. So when you come in the door, right, how well are you brought into the company culture? How well do you understand what your priorities are? Do you have the time and runway to build relationships? That onboarding aspect is critically important to your success. And the other one is that emotional journey you take when you're exiting, whether it's voluntary or involuntary. Your first and last 90 days at any company are very important. So be really strategic about your networking, your branding, how you're positioning your exit. Those sorts of things I think are really important. If you're a company, I think thinking about your onboarding training, your exit interviews, and why people are leaving and how you're treating people as they exit the door is very important for your employment brand as you go forward, especially in an environment where skills are really hard to get. You may have employees that boomerang back to your company at some point, but if you're treating them poorly, that's not going to happen. Okay, so what are the takeaways? What do we need to take action on? This was great information, Rachel, but what are we going to do about it? If you have heard me say it once, you're going to hear me say it 53 times, which is build your AI fluency now. It is not optional anymore. And if you're unable to do it in your job, then I really want you to think about how you can use it in your daily life. Write out a chore schedule, use it for meal planning, write journal entries about what you did that day. I don't care, but start working on prompt engineering and getting comfortable with tools. There are a number of other ones. In fact, if you guys want me to, I can do another video. It'll probably just be a YouTube as opposed to a podcast, but the kind of tools that I'm using in my everyday use, because there are things that have just really changed my world, and I'd be happy to share those with you. The next one is I really want you to think about owning your own career engagement. We can't just wait on our employers to fix engagement, change an environment, change your own career trajectory. If you are unhappy with it, we've got to own it and figure out the right ways to shift that. Very fundamentally, it's not even about your manager kind of owning talent decisions. We own our own motivation, our own upskilling, and our own career direction. The third point is getting serious about internal mobility. So, we're thinking about reskilling and upskilling at the organizational level, right? If that's what companies are thinking about, then we need to learn to take advantage of that. So look for companies who are doing promotions within and have good reputations for hiring to develop their employees. You look even on LinkedIn if you see employees who have moved into different jobs and careers. I even really like to watch job postings if people are hiring for, skills architects or learning and development. Those sorts of things also tell me where a company is investing. Still related to your own career engagement, the fourth aspect is making your work visible. So if you are a remote employee or you're in hybrid, I want you to think about how you tighten up your visibility strategy. Does your manager know all of the things that you have accomplished? Probably not. A lot of us are really uncomfortable talking about, what we nailed the last month, but make sure they really know all of these good things. There's a lot to be said for advocating for yourself in this way and building that network, because that's the kind of network you're going to want when you are ready to move internally. Work is changing incredibly fast, but it doesn't mean that you have to feel out of control. This is all within our grasp if we are smart and planful and strategic about it. So if this episode helped you, please subscribe and leave a comment. I'd love to know what was interesting, how it helped you, or if there's other areas that you're really worried about. Thanks so much. This is Rachel Bourne with The Shift Show.